Okay, what I'm going to try to explain in this video is the banks and lines of credit, and also how these lines of credit and the banks themselves can actually freeze up the system. Banks extend lines of credit to each other. Uh, they lend money to each other all the time, and when a bank lends money to another bank, it creates that money and out of thin air, basically, and puts it on their books as a loan, just like they loan to other people. And so banks, it's interbank lending and also interbank lines of credit that they extend to other banks. As we can see, these green lines represent the lines of credit between these banks, and all the I've drawn in there credit with a dollar sign indicating green for good credit. These banks have good credit, and that's because the other banks and the other people that they've lent to, the money to, that's on their books, are paying them back, including the people they've lent money to. So when they make a loan to you for, say, $100,000, then you're paying them back slowly, and the bank then has good credit. If you don't pay them back the money that you owe them, then what the bank does is that is a problem for the bank. Then that credit turns into a debt for the bank, and that's called a non-performing loan when you don't pay them back. And the same thing happens when another bank can't pay them back. Then that becomes a much worse problem because we're talking about much larger amounts of money. And that rarely happens because when a bank lends to another bank, they expect to get paid back, and they do get paid back. It's very rarely. And this the situation that happened in 2008 was when a big bank went down and it can't pay back. And so now what we're going to show you is these banks. We're going to create an imaginary situation where one of these banks that I have here listed has too many bad loans on its books, and it can't pay back the other banks. And so we're going to pick Deutsche Bank right here, Deutsche Bank, and we're going to flip them over. And now you see Deutsche Bank's credit has suddenly turned into a debt. All it has to happen is that they don't have the money to pay back. Then credit turns instantly into debt. Now, because they can't pay back, what happens then is these lines of credit right here, I'm going to draw an X on them. This line of credit here get instantaneously canceled when the bank goes under. So now in this scenario, Deutsche Bank just went down, a sinking ship. It just went under, and the banks that are next to it that normally extend lines of credit to Deutsche Bank, including all the banks that would send lines of credit to Deutsche Bank, now do not extend those lines of credit. They've frozen credit to Deutsche Bank. Also, another strange thing happens. These other banks have taken on credit from Deutsche Bank. They've borrowed and lent money to Deutsche Bank. And now that Deutsche Bank has sunk, suddenly these other banks have money on their books that can't be paid back because it was money that Deutsche Bank was going to pay them. And they were relying on Deutsche Bank to get their money back. And now Deutsche Bank's under. So now all of a sudden, I don't know which bank. We can take our pick, right? But who knows? Because you don't know who's lent money to who. Let's just say it could be maybe Wells Fargo. I'm just guessing. I don't really know. But let's just say all of a sudden, boom! right? They have a problem. And you didn't know they were going to have a problem until Deutsche Bank went down. Now all of a sudden they got a problem. So now this line of credit here is canceled too. And now all of a sudden, because that line of credit's canceled, say another bank over here starts to pop. And these lines of credit get canceled. So now what happens when all that happens suddenly? And it can happen within a matter of hours. What happens is a panic hits. Now this is a similar scenario to what happened in 2008. With this modern age, there was a time when all of this would have taken days. But now it can happen in a matter of minutes or hours with the modern network we have. So now what sort of a situation do we have? Well, we have a situation where banks are popping, kind of the way light bulbs would pop out if there was a massive surge of electricity, like a lightning strike. And so what would happen is now at this point is the government would have to step in, the same as they did in 2008. And they would have to put money in to these banks that are popping off. And when they put money in, what the government would do is they would flip these debts back over again. Now the banks would be flipped back over again, the banks that were getting in trouble. So flip them all back over because the government now has made good for the financial problems of these banks. They might let one go down, say Deutsche Bank, stay in debt because they figure they could manage that. And what they would do is once these banks come back online, these lines of credit would be restored. So you might say, well, problem solved. Thank you, government, for bailing out the banks. Well, actually, no, because back in 2008, the cost for bailing out the banks was in the trillions. This time, the cost for building out the banks would probably be 10 times what it cost in 2008, because the problem is 10 times worse. So the natural thing would be that back in 2008, we had a monetary policy of quantitative easing and bailing out the banks. That monetary policy was stimulus. This time, it would not be stimulus. This time, it would be something that I like to call hyperstimulus. Or you could put it stimulus on steroids. We're probably looking at stimulus in the order of 10 times what it would have taken last time. So this is a real problem. And there's no easy solution to it. Remember, credit is debt. The flip side of credit is debt. So all of the credit in the expanding credit world, and we've had in the credit expansion for the last 30 years, we've actually had a debt expansion. And when this credit collapses, it collapses suddenly, and it creates a tremendous deflation. That deflation, when the government fixes it, creates the opposite effect. It starts to create inflation. And so what happened in 2008 would be a little bit different than what would happen this time. What happened in 2008 was a tremendous deflation, and the monetary policy that they used did not create an inflation because the deflation was so powerful. All it did was counter effect. It was only a counter effect to the deflation, and so that's why we didn't get a tremendous amount of inflation. But this time would be completely different. This time it would be hyper monetization rather than just regular monetizing, and so the effect would be much greater on the inflation side after, when they have to fix the problem. The natural inclination for a bust up like this, when the banks go in debt and they extend that debt to other banks and you get a credit freeze, it's deflationary, extremely deflationary. But they're not going to allow that deflation to continue, because it would, if they allowed it to continue, this is what would happen. You get one bank go under. They don't do anything about it. Credit lines are frozen. Deflation starts. The second bank goes under. They don't do anything about it. The third bank goes under. They don't do anything about it. They don't stop it. The fourth bank goes under. They don't stop it. More credit lines are canceled. More banks go under. They don't do anything about it. The deflation continues to spiral out of control. In the end, all credit lines would be cut if they don't do anything about it. The deflation would be massive. And in the end, what it would do is shut down the entire system. They will not let this happen. The reason why they will not let this happen is it's a destroyer, not just to the financial system, but to the governments themselves. The governments are not going to sit there and do nothing while every bank collapses. That would be suicidal to the government. So they're going to stop this before it goes too far. And there's only one way that they can stop it, and that's with monetary policy. But this time, hyper-monetary policy. Thank you very much for listening. Like and subscribe. I make these videos. Enjoy making these videos for you people. And I